The day that he passed away, he had gone home on hospice, and people in the community knew that his time was short. People from all over came to his bedside. They said all kinds of things that we didn't know. Thank you for keeping the heat on at our house. Thank you for protecting our family when we weren't safe. Thank you for giving our family your car. And the people that wanted an opportunity to go to his bedside and say thank you. And I think that's a life well lived.
Welcome to Brain Chatter. Join us as we explore real-life examples of leaders who listen past the daily noise, lead themselves and others with clarity, and make an effective difference on the front lines of leadership in life and work. In societies across the globe, the calm, sage counsel of a wise grandparent is something really quite extraordinary and impactful. Sometimes it's an actual grandparent, sometimes it's not. It's an older person who invested time in our growth and simply loved us as a grandchild. Anyone who has had a special relationship like this can stop and think back on all the impacts of this investment in their adult life. Today, I'll be talking with my friend Bari Watson Beasley, now a CEO, about advice from her grandfather, J.D. Phillips, and how she applies that wisdom in leading herself and leading an organization all these years later. And by the way, J.D. happened to be one of the wisest, most intelligent, and most humble people I've ever personally met. I'm your host, Derek Brown. Welcome to Brain Chatter, Bari.
Hi, Derek. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Before we get to your introduction, let me ask you this question. In observing your grandfather as you grew up and into adulthood, what is one of the most important examples of behavior or leadership that he modeled that you try to apply to your own life and leadership style in adulthood?
I love having an opportunity to talk about my grandfather because he definitely influenced who I am and how I work and how I function. Papa, as I'll refer to him, always said, "How can I help you?" And that was just what he lived by and all that he did. In the job that I do here at the Heritage Foundation, I wear many hats, and it seems like every hour there's a different task at hand, but I always try to live by that same mantra of how can I help you? And I find that can really get people working together when you know that someone is there to just do what they can to help you, no matter what the task is. And I did learn that from my grandfather.
8 years after his death at 95, I still think of your grandfather often. His story was really amazing to me. He worked his way up from being a rivet driver at Pullman Standard building train cars to becoming a manager, an inventor, and his innovations with train car engineering really received a lot of attention. He was wildly intelligent. He could memorize entire books, which he did. He was a boxer in his younger years. He regularly did volunteer work, and while he only had the opportunity to get a high school education, he regularly wowed far more formally educated people with the ways he applied his intelligence and his inventiveness. And he also amazed those very same people with his genuine humility, just the way he treated and loved his fellow humankind, regardless of who they were. He also had an unbelievable work ethic and outworked almost everyone around him, no matter where they were, above or below him on the organization chart. What's one of your favorite stories about the impact your grandfather had on his workplace or on his coworkers?
There are a lot of stories that I've heard through the years that I smile about, my mom and I will laugh about. What I would say about my grandfather in his years with Pullman Standard Company is that he loved the company. He loved the people that he worked with. And so sometimes he would come home and tell my grandmother, "Well, I got in trouble today. I had to go to the supervisor's office because I was helping everybody else with their job." So he'd finish his job, and he loved his coworkers so much, and he loved that company so much that he would spend his time when he wasn't taking care of his own task by doing other people's work as well. So I think about that often. I think how amazing would our world be today if everybody had that philosophy. Even years later, after he retired, he would always want an opportunity to reconnect with the people that he worked with. He was just always interested to find out where they were after they retired and find a way to connect with them. So he just loved people, he loved hard work, and he loved doing all that he could to make a difference in the world.
One of your grandfather's traits that I witnessed is that he was probably almost always the smartest person in the room. But he never started from a position of wanting others to know what he thought first. And by that, I mean, I observed him start with a place of listening. He always assumed the other person had something valuable to say or share and wanted the other person to share first. How do you think that impacted his life and his relationships with those around him?
I think having that trait made him a trusted source for other people. And as you describe that, I can see him sitting at the kitchen table and engaging with someone new in his home and listening. And you're so right about that. He would always listen first before he would speak. I don't know if I always do a great job with that. I always have a million things going in my brain. So I need to be thinking about being more like Papa and being a great listener. But I think it made him trustworthy. I think it showed his wisdom. And I think that it's a really critical trait when you're leading an organization. And Papa was a great leader, not only at Pullman, he was a great leader for our family. And you are very correct. He always listened first. And when he did speak, it was with great wisdom. I feel like some of the greatest advice I ever got was at the kitchen table sitting with him. And it was life lessons about what's really important in life. And I feel like with my own leadership, I think at the end of the day, when you have a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, you've heard about all the money we're trying to raise, the buildings, the places we're saving. There's a lot of pressure in the job that I'm in, but every day I try to approach it with joy and kindness and love, and I really learned that from my grandparents.
Are there particular stories about your grandfather's life that you think of when you face particularly difficult days or situations in the workplace?
I think about my grandfather's life as a whole quite often, and I think about his marriage with my grandmother. He was someone who lived a very simple life, but he was richer than anybody that I ever knew, really. He had the joy of gardening. He had a 72-year marriage. He was so proud of his children. All three of them graduated from the University of Alabama, and he was very proud of that. He loved music. He sang all the time, if you remember that. He was beloved and respected in both of his careers. When I'm particularly facing a difficult decision, particularly stressful day, I often think on just the goodness of his life as a whole, of the life that he and my grandmother led. It was a life full of joy. The door was always open, and if you lived in our community, you knew that. You could always go in the kitchen door. There's always great food. There was always great conversation. Everybody was welcome. Everybody was welcome. And so, just in general, I feel like there is really a bleed between my work life and my personal life. A lot of the people who are donors, who are coworkers, who are on the board, they come to my house and have dinner, or my family engages with me on these festivals that we do. So there are not really distinct boundaries, I would say, in the work that I do here at the Heritage Foundation between home and work. And I just try to live the life like my grandfather.
Tell me the story of the elderly neighbor and the dog that was shared between he and your daughter.
I love that story. So we were living in Thompson Station. Alexandria, my daughter, was about 2 weeks old, and I remember opening the door to the kitchen one day, and I saw my husband walking up the sidewalk with a little dog, and he said, "Annie, meet your mom." And that was my first time to meet Annie, our new rescue dog. He had rescued Annie on his own. He had not even consulted me about this, but I knew that he was looking to adopt a dog. So Annie became our dog, and we lived out in the country, and she was, outdoors, and she is kind of a roamer, and so she likes to roam around. And we knew that she was going somewhere, and we weren't sure where she was going at one point. And we talked about it, but she would, be back in a little while. So we just kind of let her roam around a little bit. But some time went by, weeks, maybe a couple months, and a gentleman came to our door. We did not know our neighbors. We did not know this gentleman. And he came to the front door and said, is Annie your dog? And we said, yes. And he said, I'll give you $10,000 for Annie. And we said, well, wait a minute. And anyway, long story short, it was a neighbor named Jimmy. He had been very sick. He had had a stroke, and he was in a hospital bed there across the road at his home. We didn't know any of this. And Annie, somehow, how did she know? I will never know, but somehow she found her way to Jimmy's window. He was very down, did not really have a will to live. And his daughter would see Annie at the window, and she'd say, "Oh, Dad, here, let's go to the door and see this dog." And finally, Annie started coming in, and then Annie would visit and sit on Jimmy's hospital bed. And so he just was crazy about Annie. We didn't know any of this was even going on. So my husband said, I tell you what, Jimmy, why don't we share Annie? And we'll bring her to you every morning when we go to work. And then in the evenings, if we can just get her back, we think that'd be a great arrangement. So it was like a shared custody. Anyway, we would take Annie to Jimmy in the morning. She'd spend the day with him. And then at this point, he was able to drive back and forth. And so he would drive his truck from next door over to our house every afternoon around 4:30, 5 o'clock. And what happened with that is that, yes, it was that we all got to share Annie and love Annie, and Annie did so much for Jimmy's life. But also in that process, we learned that his daughter had passed away, that was originally his caregiver when he first met Annie. And so he was very alone, and he was deep in grief. And so it was like we got to become a family for Jimmy. He would sit on that wall out by the garage when my husband was working on projects and talk and visit. He got to know Alexandria, my daughter, so well. We just all became really close. He did digress in his own health again, and the arrangement became pretty much that Annie lived solely with Jimmy and was there when he passed away. And we're so glad that he had Annie to love, and that Annie was just such a support system to Jimmy, that she brought us all together. And now we've moved to this about 8.5-acre farm. We did get a new puppy. Alexandria was given this beautiful dog, Honey, by Senator Frist and Tracy. So we have Annie and Honey there at our farm in Leapers Fork with us, and they are just having the time of their life. I just think she's so special. She's the incredible little Annie, as we call her.
Wow. What sort of lesson do you think that story will tell your daughter as she grows up?
I hope that story tells her that there's room for everybody, and we're always going to share what we have. We're going to work to love our neighbors, to bring joy to our neighbors, to know people. And everything about that whole belief system was instilled in me as a child by my whole family, my parents, my grandparents, both sets of my grandparents. And I hope that life lessons like this in her own life are reflective of those same beliefs and principles.
Your grandfather was also a deeply spiritual person. And while this podcast is about organizational leadership and not faith, his faith played a major role in his mission to help anyone around him that he could. For years, he spent parts of his weekends traveling to state prisons to visit and encourage and offer classes to prisoners to try to help them have hope and get to a point where they could have a better life one day if they were released. And for decades, until almost 90, he did repairs and cut grass, all the grass, which was I think about 5 acres of grass at his church and its super old, large cemetery, and refused to ever accept even $1 at any point. And he maintained a large garden, as you mentioned, at his home until the very end of his life, giving fresh vegetables each season to anyone who visited and taking free produce to people he knew were in need in the community. His sense of leading a life oriented at something larger than himself and his dedication to finding meaningful ways, big or small, to help others every single day never waned. He was perpetually asking others, and I heard him say this many times, including to strangers, how can I help you? Do you think this sense of mission for helping others and daily physical work, decades after retirement, contributed to his happiness, his good health, and to his long life?
I have no doubt that all contributed to his long life and to his happiness. His joy came from people, from being outside, land, gardens, nature, serving. That was everything he was about. And I think that he was just so content and he had such a mission for his life that absolutely played a role in the longevity of his life and the people that he influenced.
Now let's go back and do a couple of introductions. First on you, Bari, and then on the organization that you lead today. Please say a little about your life, both personal and professional.
I'm originally from the Birmingham area, and I went to the University of Alabama. I graduated with an undergraduate degree in communication studies and then a master's degree in advertising and public relations. I worked for a few years at the University of West Alabama, and then I made the move in 2005 to Nashville to work for Belmont University. I had some great years there. Met Corey, my husband, and we got engaged and got married, and we bought a farmhouse. It actually looked a lot like my grandparents' house. We have a beautiful daughter. Her name is Alexandria. She's 5 years old now. And we just moved from Thompson Station to an area called Leapers Fork. It's a part of Franklin, and it's just a really special part of this county.
Tell me a little bit about the Heritage Foundation of Williamson County and its mission and what really attracted you to go and work for that organization and now lead that organization.
I love the Heritage Foundation. In May of 2017, I was hired as the first ever Chief Executive Officer. But the Heritage Foundation is all about saving the places that matter in our community. We work to advocate for historic spaces. We do a lot of advocacy work at the state level. We save iconic places in the community like the Franklin Theater and the Leahy McGidd Big House for Historic Preservation, which is known as the Old Jail. We also now are saving a historic campus and turning it into a beautiful place for art and gardens and events. So these are just really treasures in our community. So we work in that space. We also have events that are a part of the culture of Franklin and Williamson County. So we host every year Main Street Festival in the spring, Pumpkin Fest in the fall, and Dickens of a Christmas every winter. And if you live anywhere in the South, you probably at some point have visited historic downtown Franklin and attended one of these wonderful festivals, and it's something that our organization produces. Another major event that we have every year, this is the 47th year for the Heritage Ball. It's the longest running black tie event in Williamson County, and it's our biggest fundraiser every year.
Let's talk a little bit more about one piece that you just mentioned. It's not often that a nonprofit CEO gets to negotiate the purchase of an entire historic college campus into their organization's portfolio, certainly not at the very beginning of their tenure. How did that happen? And if you can, talk about it from the perspective of relationship building, leadership, and collaboration, and what it ultimately means to have that space, that college campus preserved.
I had been at the Heritage Foundation for about a year, and then we learned that the campus, which housed the O'Moore School of Design, would be left vacated because the college, O'Moore School of Design, was going to merge and be a part of Belmont University in Nashville. And Franklin, is about 30 minutes south of Nashville. The school was going to be part of Belmont on the Nashville campus, and it left this campus vacated. The way that it was zoned, 15 houses could have been built on this property. It's an oasis in downtown Franklin. It's about 5.5 acres, with 2 historic mansions included on the property. I served on a think tank with a group of people trying to determine what should happen with this property and how we could save it. Our organization did not immediately think to take it on as a capital project because we really had about $1 million of debt left on the restoration of the old jail, which is the building that's our headquarters here in Franklin. The town is amazing. The people here are amazing. Calvin and Marilyn Leahy and Emily McGidd stepped forward, and they made $1 million donation, which completed the capital campaign project for the old jail, really took our organization to another level, and we were ready at that point to take on another capital project. I approached our board and our board president, David Garrett, and said, I'd really like to go to Belmont and talk with them about the possibility of giving us an option to raise the funds to save this campus. And then David, our board president, he and I began to work together on a concept for the campus and what it could be. It really will be, when it's finished, another division. So the Franklin Theater is a division of our organization. The Downtown Franklin Association is a division of the Heritage Foundation. And now a third division will be Franklin Grove Estate and Gardens. Long story short, we went to Nashville. We met with Bob Fisher, president of Belmont University, and talked about the Heritage Foundation. We asked for an option of 1 year to raise the $6 million that was initially needed to purchase the campus from Belmont. Dr. Fisher at first said, well, let's go with a 6-month option. So we had 6 months to raise $6 million. What's interesting about this, what brought me to Nashville in 2005 was to work for Belmont University, and specifically to work for Bob Fisher. So all these years later, now I serve as CEO of the Heritage Foundation, and I went right back to Nashville to the same office, to the same wonderful president of Belmont who brought me to this town, and approached him about this project. He was very gracious to give us this time, this option. But instead of having a year, we had 6 months to raise $6 million. We held a press conference in downtown Franklin. We talked about the fact that the organization had an option. There was a limited amount of time. And just as they always do, people in this community stepped forward. We had those funds that were necessary to not only secure the property, purchase it from Belmont, but to begin to work on the quiet phase of this capital campaign. And we've already raised almost $12 million to date. And so what it will be when it's complete is it will be a place for art. It will be a place for beautiful gardens. It will be a place with a conservatory to hold events. And then also one of the mansions will be used for an entrepreneurship center. So it's a really exciting project.
And as I think about what you said, the two families who gave the money to preserve the old jail and all these donors who have given money to really kickstart this new project, those people certainly have to have a lot of trust for you and the staff and the board there. And they have to know that you're going to use their dollars wisely, because I imagine there's an enormous amount of demand for donors like that among all sorts of nonprofits. Can you say a little bit about how you build that trust with big donors like that?
Yes, I'm happy to talk about that. Part of the equation that's worked so well in raising significant funding for this project, I think it's about having a great vision for a project. It's about authenticity. It's about kindness and just building relationships with people that are innovators and that have helped Franklin become what it is today. And that doesn't feel like work to me. There's a lot of joy in that.
So one other component of what you do is saving what's called the Rosenwald School. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So one special part of Franklin Grove will be the placement of a Rosenwald School on that campus here in downtown Franklin. What a Rosenwald School is a school that was created before desegregation. Booker T. Washington and Julius Rosenwald worked together to create Rosenwald schools. Today, the National Trust for Historic Preservation cites Rosenwald schools as one of the most endangered types of buildings in America. I think back when they were created, there were probably 4,000 or 5,000 created. There are very few left standing. It just so happens there is one left in Williamson County, and we've been able to purchase that one-room schoolhouse. We're going to disassemble it and reassemble it, completely restore it, and put it on that campus of Franklin Grove. It will have a museum inside that tells the importance of this piece of African American history. And then we'll utilize that schoolhouse as part of our educational offerings. And I just love this so much because for me, this school has really helped connect preservation and stories and people. And so from our entire conversation, you'll see that I really care, and my whole family does, about people. And so this is where it really all came to life for me. We were able to identify some former students who are now in their 70s and 80s, as well as a teacher there at this particular Rosenwald school. This one's called Lee Buckner. And we invited them all to a lunch here at my office. This was some time back. And it was amazing for these students now in their 70s and 80s to talk about their lives, so many of them just running businesses, all of their success. They talked about the importance of that one-room schoolhouse. And they were able to even say, I can draw a diagram for you. I know where the the piano was. I know where the desks were located. I think our art is buried underneath the building. How fascinating is that? And
Wow.
they talked about the importance of their teachers, about music, and so I happened to ask a question. My staff was all in the room. All of these former students were in the room. And I said, "Do you happen to remember any of the songs that you would sing?" And one of the ladies said, "Of course I do. I sing it every day in the nursing home." And at that moment, I realized that preservation is more than buildings. It's also about stories. I don't know of anything I'm more excited about or more proud of than that project.
If you were able to go back in time and give yourself one major piece of advice at the point you first started managing people, or if you were today to give advice to someone being promoted to manage people for the first time, what would be some of that advice?
I think you have to be committed to hiring great people. As I mentioned, I look for those intangibles. I look for character. I look for quality in people, but also I look for experience and I look for skill set. Because when I bring in somebody, for example, in the event space who is innovative and has done that, really that makes all the difference in helping us quickly go the next level. But also, I would say it's very important to stand back and to trust the abilities of those people. When you are a CEO, you're a type A, you like to make an A on the test, and you're goal oriented. Sometimes it's hard to hand over the control of different areas to folks. So I would say that it's just really important to be strategic in hiring, get those great right team members who gel well together and then just be the wind beneath their wings to flourish and be successful. And I think I'm actually in an interesting season right now because we've really expanded. I mean, we went 5 employees when I became CEO of the Heritage Foundation to now approximately 20. And then when you add in the staff, full-time and part-time at the theater, 45 employees. And so I think I'm in an interesting season that no longer do I need to sell all the sponsorships and help produce an event and whatever it might be. But I can stand back and I can lead and I can watch the people that I've recruited to come here really be successful and work well together and do great things in their jobs.
We've covered a lot of ground on the topic of leading with How Can I Help You, a grandparent's example. Have we missed anything, or is there anything else that you would like to add?
I'd love to share about the day that he passed away. He had gone home on hospice, and people in the community knew that his time was short. People from all over came to his bedside. They said all kinds of things that we didn't know. Thank you for keeping the heat on at our house. Thank you for protecting our family when we weren't safe. Thank you for giving our family your car. And the people that wanted an opportunity to go to his bedside and say thank you. And I think that's a life well lived.
Bari, thank you so much for sharing so much valuable time with us. I really appreciate you being a guest on Brain Chatter.
Thank you so much, Derek. You are special to me and to our family. And thank you for thinking of me and inviting me to be a part of this podcast today.
To read more about Bari or the Heritage Foundation of Williamson County, to access a direct link to connect with Bari on LinkedIn, and to see links to resources mentioned in today's podcast, go to brainchatterpodcast.com. Brain Chatter is a production of Ken Chapman & Associates, Incorporated. We assist clients with leadership development, corporate culture transformation initiatives, behavior-based professional development for health and safety issues, succession planning, and other services that help clients maximize their investment in human capital, making a difference in organizations and individuals' lives for almost 40 years. Learn more at leaderscode.com.